protocol having been established, I want to say that I'm really pleased to be here today. I want to say thank you first to the OAS for the opportunity to speak today, to Carrie Ann Barrett, to Allison Pitlack, wherever they're hiding now, to all my colleagues and allies in the audience. I see some folks from the White House were here earlier, who've supported my growth and my voice over the years. One of the threads that keeps getting pulled while we talk about cybersecurity is investing in your people. And so today's talk kind of moves in that direction. For those of you who know me, you've likely heard me say the following words before. They are pro forma, but I do have to say them. I'm required to say that the opinions I express today are not necessarily the views of the Department of Defense, the Navy, or the U.S. Naval War College. These are my academic views, and they don't necessarily reflect those opinions. So while I am here in my official capacity, it's not all that I am. I'm a number of things. I'm a professor who teaches military officers. I'm a former advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering in the Pentagon. I'm an executive director of maritime thank you, that feedback was killing me, within the ICS Village, which is operated by a man named Tom Van Norman. And perhaps the thing that I'm most proud of professionally is that I am the hacker who bought a whole bunch of Nespresso coffee pods from eBay, and just to expose an internet fraud scheme. So all of those things are true about me. So mostly I'm just weird, and it has taken me a very long time to become comfortable in my own skin. To become comfortable with who I am and all the different things that I am, and no small part of that, no small function of that is my gender. And so as I was asked to talk today about gender and cybersecurity policies, rather than talk at a meta level about the global or state or even Department of Defense level policies regarding cybersecurity and gender, I wanted to go deep and talk about workforce policy and the things that inform and the reasons why we have to think about workforce policy. So I've titled this talk, Dear Fish, What Color is the Water? And the reference, if you don't know it, is to the Canadian media philosopher Marshall McLuhan. And I'll read directly from Marshall here. One thing about which fish know exactly nothing is water, since they have no anti-environment which would enable them to perceive the element they live in. This is a talk about invisibility of the world we walk around in. It is an observation about human systems and the socio-technical environments that make them invisible until something or someone comes along and produces a disturbance so that all of a sudden we can see it. So I'll start with stuff we can see, and then I'll move to the things that are invisible, and hopefully we'll come back around to policy and cybersecurity policies in the workplace. So I'm going to start with something fairly certain we all do see already, and I'm going to begin with something that is obvious, that we all know to be true. And I'm going to show you one graph. It's not a great one, but it's a common one, and you can find it on LinkedIn, but they mostly all look the same. This is what most of us see. And I think we all agreed roughly that this is true, that at best persons who identify as female make up about 25% of the US workforce, right? Globally, that number is actually quite high. The reality is closer to 15 to 17% of females are represented in cybersecurity workforce. This is rooted in most ways to a much deeper issue in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, the training spaces into which we might find cybersecurity people. In my space, in the Department of Defense, the places that I work in, the kinds of things that I do, that number is actually much lower, like staggeringly low, like eye-wateringly low. It is very common for me to be the only female in the room. By the way, just a small shout out to the OAS for how amazingly diverse this audience is. It's shocking and beautiful, and I almost want to take a picture, so thank you. So what can we do about this? What can we do about
what can we do to generate the policies that we need, the various HR tools that we need, the upskilling courses we need to make sure that people who come in the door can stay, the support networks, better mentoring, better cybersecurity is how that works, right? If there's one thing I think we all firmly believe is that the more defense we have in cybersecurity, the better off we're going to be, right? And having more people, more capacity will make us stronger. And therefore, just as it is a blanket observation, if anywhere we need more gender awareness, better policies and better balance, it's here in cybersecurity. That has to happen, full stop. So this slide is about the obvious, okay? So let's talk about what's not obvious, and let's talk about what's invisible. First, just a quick preliminary slide, not to point out when people have been good or bad, particularly when we talk about workplace policies. And so some of the fish feel a little bloated, a little scared, right? Don't be scared, it's fine, we're good. I'm here to make a case for why these workplace policies exist, and what more to think about when we walk around in these spaces, because as it turns out, policy is an effect of change. Policies get created because we recognize. So what do we need to be paying attention to? This is a talk about structures, norms, and habits, how they can be gendered. That structures, norms, and habits can be gendered is actually in itself fine. It's fine. The fact that it can drive gendered behavior among colleagues, influence what I say or do or choose to do, that can also be fine. That it can create gendered expectations, cause people to act toward me a certain way, cause people to expect me to become a certain role. It gets a little shaky, but at some point it becomes not okay. At some point, it starts to generate costs for some people and not others. Changes how I conduct my day, makes me less efficient, less effective, more defensive. And it affects how I manage my brand, my personal career, right? It affects how I think about my day, all without being noticed, all often without me even noticing that this is happening. For cybersecurity, when the workforce is on a good day 25%, when it is highly likely that your workforce that's participating, that's trying to get into that space, is definitely feeling this, you probably don't see the gendered elements of your workspace. They're likely so normal that they're invisible to you, and so the question is, can you see it? Can you spot it? Or is it just too hard to see? Is it invisible? Okay, so I'm actually a college professor by trade, so I'm going to make you participate with me. I'm going to ask some very simple questions, and I need you to shout out some answers, so here we go. Let's talk about invisible offices and furniture. Just answer me. It's a very simple, it's not a trick question. What is that? It's a desk. This is, see, look, you're A+, everyone's winning, this is good, okay? And what is this? Those are chairs. Are these gendered? Are they though? Third point. Are you aware at all of the desk over on everyone's left? There's that white block on the front of that desk. Do you know what that's called in office furniture land? It's called a modesty panel. It's called a modesty panel. If you ever have to manage an office and you need to order new furniture, welcome to management. You want to think about, do I want a modesty panel on the front of my desk? So here's what happens, right? So I'm being asked, a couple years back, I'm being asked to give a talk. I didn't realize how much I love modesty panels until I was asked to provide public commentary on cyber something. And it seems like the norms of women's professional wear are just sort of like a career trap sometimes, because what seems perfectly normal, perfectly professional to wear, a work skirt and heels, is not designed for you when you're giving your public talk on a stage in high chairs. It's nearly impossible to be as flexible and as natural as you want to be because you're too busy perched to the side with your knees pinned together. Also, when I decided to give this talk, I wasn't looking at the stage, and I'm a little, just so that we're all aware. You can wear a skirt if you want to. I choose, right, to wear the clothes that I wear, to wear the heels that I wear. But I have to think about these things. And I had wished that that wonderful think tank that broadcast on television had considered that perhaps they should give me a heads up, that the norms of women's professional wear might not apply if I'm on stage, right? I have to think about those things, okay? So this is one of these situations. This is another one. You ready for this one? What is that? Are you familiar with this video? Okay, this is referred to sometimes as Women's Winter, sometimes as the Great Arctic Office Conspiracy. So the issue here, it says Women's Winter is coming. The issue here is that in summer, it is not uncommon for women to start bringing blankets and cardigans into the office. And it's because office thermostats, at least in the United States, are calibrated for the metabolism of males and the clothing that they are supposed to be wearing in offices. And so the joke is, every summer, women's winter is coming because everyone turns the thermostat down designed for the male body. Again, that we do so is, right, that's something you may want to think about. I'm not saying it can't be cold in the office in the summer. What I am saying is, have you thought about how invisible that is? And have you thought about all the ways in which people who have a different metabolism might be having a different experience? All right. Much like structures, furniture, and architecture, people's expectations of who and what I am, who and what a hacker is, what I look like, what a defense researcher looks like, what an advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense should look like, these expectations are invisible until they suddenly appear. They're sneaky, they lurk around, right? And suddenly they reveal themselves, and suddenly we're confronted with unstated assumptions and expectations of who I am and what I am. So this advertisement is arcane, right? And we recognize it as being wrong, right? Because we recognize, okay, yeah, that's right, this is very gendered. Right? The women is supposed to be in the kitchen. This is an actual advertisement, by the way, from the 1970s. This is, right, it's so easy. Kitchens, cooking, women. We expected her to do that then. We see it, we think it's funny now. Because of course that's nonsense, right? Of course that's nonsense. But what about the workplace? And for those of you who've heard my talk at first, you know this part as well, but that's okay. I was selected to represent the Navy in a bilateral military exchange with our Chinese naval counterparts. It was one of the greatest honors of my life. We went to China and we started to have this two-part dialogue about technology and about wargaming and cybersecurity, and there were discussions about offense and defense, and it was all very high level. And at the end of the day, we go to the formal dinner. Raise your hand if you have been to a Chinese formal dinner. Okay. Formal military dinners are adversarial affairs. They're competitive. You sit across the table. You don't mix and match partners. We are sitting there, lined up, the US delegation, in front of the Chinese delegation. And what it is it's not actually a dinner. It's a competitive drinking contest. Right? It's adversarial and it's competitive, and there's two in front of it, and we're in a certain section of China, so we're having what's called Mao Tai, which is roughly somewhere between 80 to 120 proof. So it's straight whiskey, right? And Mao Tai is fascinating for a number of reasons, but you have each and every person in the delegation has a large carafe and a small carafe, and you stand up and you issue your démarche. And then you hold up your little cup, right? You fill it, and then you toast to your adversary, and then everybody drinks. And this happens for everybody sitting at the delegation. Everybody has to stand up, toast, and give it, right? And so, and if you're feeling super bold and you really want to kind of knock it to them, you take the big carafe and you drink it straight. Okay, so we're doing this, and we're going at it, right? And you might think, oh, this is probably the gender point, but that's not true because I'm an accomplished drinker. I can drink. There it is. So the thing there's two things that are happening. One, are these Scotch drinkers in the audience? Okay, Scotch people. That smells like Band-Aids. It smells like iodine. It's terrible. But I can make it work. Mau Tai, good news, smells like marshmallows. And then you drink it, and it tastes like foot. It tastes like an old sock. And I'm sure that people who drink Scotch think that it doesn't taste like Band-Aids. But anyway, so one, Mau Tai is bad. So I take the first shot and I'm like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. I'm ready to give up. I'm ready to give up. But it's fine. I muscle through. A couple shots later, you can't taste it anymore. It's good. My Chinese counterparts stand up, and it's very clear I'm the only woman at this delegation, right? So they stand up and they say to the women, uh-oh. And there it is. The color of the water is bleedingly clear, right? Everybody like, hey, fish, what color is that water today? Because there was no female Chinese counterpart. And so the search begins, desperately looking on the Chinese side for any woman to come forward. So could you imagine how terrified this poor executive assistant was? She's minding her business, taking notes in the back. Right? She's not ready for this competition. She isn't prepared like a champion. She doesn't have a liver, the size of a basketball like I do. And she gets pulled up and is asked to represent on her side. And what's worse is she doesn't even drink. And everybody is painfully aware that this is in fact a deeply gendered environment. No one noticed before. It was fine when we were talking guns and bombs, right? But the minute we start figuring out oh, it's time for there's nobody else can be in the room. And that poor woman, we eventually switched out her alcohol for water, so it made it fine. But someone tries to fix it for you. So the second story, and then I'll get off this point because, again, the invisibility becomes blatantly obvious over time. So what is expected of me? Who am I supposed to be, and what am I doing in this room? And so what your colleagues do and what your team does matters too. The people who are there with you, your work colleagues. So I'm going about my business in the Pentagon, right? This is not fairly recently. In my office, I have a tremendous team. Mostly male, all ages, all races, all professional backgrounds, but predominantly male. And we're all in this front office together, and it's huge. There's probably about 10, 12 of us in there. And you walk in the front door, and on any given day for the undersecretary to do anything, she receives delegations, high-powered delegations all day. They come in the door, we get the under ready, we prep her, and then we do the thing. Normal day, delegation comes in, all male. I am standing at the back. I am at this point the senior advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Research Engineering. I'm the one who helps her understand the policy. I am in the back of the front office. There are at least 7 men between the ages of 25 and 65. There are men who are Asian, there are Hispanic males, there are white, they're all over the place, right? And I am the one female. The lead of the delegation walks all the way to the back of the room, sees me, walks up, and does one of these numbers. See, he needs photocopies. So, there it is, the color of the water. So blue, it's so blue, the water's so blue, right? It's as blue as it could get, and my colleagues had a choice. Do we call them out? Or do we just ignore it? And sometimes you just let it go because you don't want to embarrass people, right? And sometimes on your team, you have a retired Marine Corps officer with wicked steel blue eyes who's about 1 million feet tall, who stands up and says, "Sir, that's Dr. Collars. She is the senior advisor. I'll handle that paperwork for you." What your team does for you can fundamentally change how much friction you feel, even though it's there. That which feels invisible becomes visible, and you need to figure out what to do with it. They had my back. So, expectations placed on me, furniture plotting against me. What more could there be? It's the thing I do to myself. Whether anybody else sees the color of the water, I'm always working against myself. And helping people not work against themselves is the key to making this workforce grow. If you're here, you probably weren't part of a conventional employment pathway. If you're here, it probably means what I call you grew up feral. You found your way in the wild. You decided to ask questions about this weird thing named cyber, right? And it also means you probably don't have official qualifications. It probably means you don't have a degree, or if you're maybe like me, you got your degree in something nobody respects. We're in a competitive and fast-changing landscape with a lot of money getting thrown around, a lot of big names, a lot of flashy lights, which means you probably have it, or you probably know somebody who's got imposter syndrome. The idea that you couldn't possibly know enough, that everybody else in the room knows more than you do, and that you can't contribute. And with that little bit of toxic poison in your blood, you will start to self-censor, and you will start to limit what you think you want to get access to. And for me, this is the phrase that cuts deep for me. It cuts deep for many of you, so you can hide if you want to. Try not to make technical training the reason you count somebody out. And here's why. How long is the timeline between technical and non-technical? How much training does it take before you're considered technical? I guarantee you, and I have a PhD, I guarantee you that it's about 6 months. Now, experience is a different story. Experience is a whole different story. Can I do tickets? Can I run this defense system? I get it. It's different. But don't ever rule yourself out. Don't rule anybody else out ever because they're just not technical, because guess what? The training is available. So if you want to be part of this, do it. Don't let anyone tell you you're not technical. It buries your worth. Ask yourself, what training do I need? What course do I need to fill that gap? What company is willing to give that to me? If a person wants to work, the answer is probably need to upskill, maybe 6 months of training. I failed calculus. It's fine. Everything's going to be fine. What are the implications for the workplace? Right? I told you a bunch of personal stories. What are the implications for the workplace? When I work against myself with imposter syndrome, when other people's expectations of who I am and what I'm supposed to be press against me, and when furniture and thermostats are conspiring against me, the implications for the cybersecurity workforce are this. A significant portion of your workforce is already exhausted before they start talking about issues of burnout, before we start talking about work-life balance, before we start talking about promotion and growth. It means a significant portion of your workforce has to navigate and anticipate and compensate just to get to their desk in the morning. It means that your workforce is busy building up defenses for themselves when they could be collaborating with their colleagues, defending networks. That's what that means. The professional development you want for your colleagues, professional development you want from your bosses and for your employees, is not how to build up tolerance for another person's lack of awareness. You want to enable growth. You want to try and see them where they're at. You want to take down the barriers that make them less efficient. You want to increase their capacity to work with their colleagues. I need you to try and see the color of the water. Thanks. Next speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Collars, for that insightful message. Technology can be perceived as gendered in many ways. For example, if the relationship between gender and technology is viewed as mutually essential, technological change is shaped and structured according to societal norms and relations, which are in turn influenced by technological transformations. Let us welcome our next panel discussion on risk analysis of new technologies from a gender perspective, moderated by Katja Vera from the OAS.
Yeah, this is good for me.
Thank you very much for being today with us. I'm Katja Vera. I'm